no pressure at all. Um, well, thank you once again. I'll try not to be a bit too long about this, but you've got the slides. I think Genevieve has my contact details. Should you need any more feedback, you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'll just have my notes here because I sort of struggle without them. This new microphone is working. Good, great. Well, it is a genuine honor to be amongst you all today. A room full of executive women in insurance. What I hear from, well, one of you told me last week that insurance is a little bit old school. So the fact that you have penetrated this perception barrier when it comes to diversity says a lot about who you guys are. And I was talking to a contact the other week. Basically, the more stories I hear, the more inspired I am by people like you, people who are different and who've had to surmount certain barriers to get to where you are. Now, this lady, she's now a friend. She's one of the most senior artificial intelligence VPs in all of Europe, right? And despite her very generous compensation, she told me how little money she had to her name because she's had to spend almost all of it in legal fees because she was going through a divorce. She was in an abusive marriage. She basically had to move continents to save her children. English wasn't even her first language. Yet she's done all this with her career. It is nothing short of remarkable and deeply inspiring. Now, I know that most other people's stories aren't as dramatic as this, but having been in this industry for a while, I've now begun to see, and I'm now convinced that there are journeys that women go through as women that make them uniquely desirable for executive posts, uniquely suitable for executive posts at least. But this is something that people who are hiring just do not see. Why? And I'm going to talk a lot about this. Women are just not seen as that capable and competent. They're not seen as leaders in a certain way. There's a perception. Now, I'm not unfamiliar with perception bias. I've been the recipient of it. Sometimes I know when I walk into certain situations just how people will see me and what they expect from me or what they feel they can do to or from me. So this is not unfamiliar stuff. And the more stories I've heard from people like you, the more encouraged I have been to take this problem head on and to see whether we can surmount this perception barrier. So basically, I'm here to present a solution. In short, to say that perceptions can be changed. I have seen it myself. There was a program I ran whilst I was in academia. It was on something quite different. It was on changing people's perceptions of religion, of people from other religions. And there's now new research coming out to show how unconscious bias can be trained or educated. I refrain to use the word educated because education sometimes is the last thing. All the psychology research tells you that when you talk of biased people, think about Brexit or Trump or people who are racist, etc. All the psychology research says that education does not solve unconscious bias. It's, if anything, if you give disconfirming evidence to people with certain beliefs, this disconfirming evidence actually empowers and enforces their beliefs. It's just what we do as people. So it's a different type of training. I prefer to use that word. So I think this can be done, and I'm going to show you exactly how. So behind this approach is an insight, and I'll tell you a bit about this insight. I am Kenyan, well, at least half Kenyan. I grew up in Kenya, and people's perceptions of women's rights in that part of the world is that they're a bit low. Women in that part of the world aren't as empowered as Western women. What people don't know, however, is that the value of women as workers is actually quite high. That has to do a lot with the fact that people see certainly Kenyan men as, charming, and they play a certain kind of social game. They're a bit slick. They're very political. They're not that interested in getting things done. I mentioned this to another one of my contacts, and she said, "No, Syano, that's just men." And so basically, whether you're hiring someone to do domestic work or hiring someone at an executive level, the perception of women is that they are competent and they get things done, which is why for a place that is, perhaps not as advanced in terms of women's rights, has the same number of women in C-suite. 48% of business owners in Kenya are women, and that says something. So there is this detachment, in my view, between social political values and labor value. That is important because for every D&I course I have seen or been in or people have gone through at your stage, they will talk about the social political stuff. They will say how it's only recently that women got the right to, I don't know, open their own bank account, and compensation levels aren't at parity, etc., etc. This is true, but we're talking about how we view women out there in the world. And that is important, yes. My question is that doesn't necessarily validly lead to the conclusion that it would lead to a change in perception of women as workers. The aim of the package that I'm going to explain is that we're not here to change who people really are. Uh, you know, I know what it's like to have a social political value in one way and to have a different labor value in another. I think they are quite distinct. The aim is for someone who's diverse to walk into an executive board, and rather than threat or difference of threats, also threat by difference being perceived, they would see opportunity. Or the literature says that you're far likely to find opportunity than a threat. So why have the standard approaches to diversity and conclusion not quite gone as far as we hoped? Quite frankly, because they're the sort of stuff that they're within the reach of rigor and science and data. And so it's easy to show that you are doing something about it. Does it get to the heart of the issue? Not quite. Think of structural changes. We need more women in our company. So have an employment policy at entry stage, and you have these sort of approaches and programs to retain them. Sometimes the perception, or many times the perception problem comes up very quickly. There was another friend. She's now left. Think of a big bank that's in the news right now. She was part of a D&I drive for women at high level. I think it was C-suite minus about 3 or 4 regional, and they had about 10 people. About 7 of them were women, and about 2 years later, they had to slim things down, and the women were the first to go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, one after the other. It was a woman who went. And when I tried to play devil's advocate to say, what was your performance like? Did you perform? And she described, as best as I could understand, that she was actually one of the most recognized performers at her level. But she also talked about how 70% of her job was politics and the stuff that she didn't really like, and which is why she left the industry. She's now doing something on her own where she's far more comfortable. Now, and 70% politics. I'll give you a quote from another friend of mine, CIO of Shell. I won't tell you which country. She basically said, "Hey, the higher up the organization you go, the more dysfunctional the team." So the fact that there's a group of people, a type of people who go there who are more interested in getting work done, who don't quite make it, says a lot about the organization. Anyway, so there's these structural approaches. Then you have data tick boxing. I sort of say, uh, actually, I read very recently in an article, I think, I don't know how recently it was, that people view the statistics and data on companies' websites and all their publications on LinkedIn. They view it with the same sort of credibility as news articles. People know how these articles are written and replicated, how statistics are formulated. Same thing goes for values. It's not that difficult to put on your DNI website, DNI page, and this is what you do, and you volunteer for this, and we contribute for that. It's seen as, and those of us who count as diverse know that you only need to push a pain point, a complaint procedure or something like that, and you'll see how people really view you. Then there are behavioral changes. Now, you're all leaders. You would have gone through a lot of training. Oddly enough, so much of your training is about how to lead your team, whereas I think much of the training that's needed is in how you guys should work as a team in your executive boards, because that's where I think it's one of the most glaring pain points of companies are. The story I like to give is that I've worked for people who are very open, transparent, and caring. Gone are the days of, someone who's not performing, slapping them on the wrist, saying, hey, you need to do this or else. Now we're all a lot more supportive. What's gone wrong? How can we support you? Anything we can do. The story I like to give is one of the nastiest, well, not, no, that's a bit too severe. Let's just say, and he won't mind me telling this story, but the person who I felt most valued under was my PhD supervisor, and he was the one who saw the most potential in me. I'd go for supervisions, uh, once or twice a month, and he was blunt and just not very nice. These things are hard. You're finding out stuff that no one else knows, and there are rules and mechanisms and tools that you can use that are really difficult to get a hand on, and that's part of the training. And he just did not let up. When something wasn't good or I wasn't doing well, he would let me know. Sometimes I'd cry. But one thing I absolutely felt for sure, he saw that I could do it. He did what he could to make me know that I could do it, and that I would contribute to to the field. And in fact, so much of my confidence in research in life comes from him. But he wasn't doing it in the nice, transparent way. And I've been in other situations where people were very nice and very supportive, etc., but they just didn't believe I could, they just didn't value me in the same sort of way. And that makes a difference. So that's why perception for me is the game changer. If that can be changed, it will change the motivation of a diverse employee to even go for a role, to do well in a role, to flourish. Right, so on to a little bit of research. So, what is this thing called unconscious bias or perception? So, did you know that 90% of all human judgment and decision making is unconscious or biased? And that's basically who we are. So when we have all these rationalistic approaches to why people make decisions and why we're not doing D&I, and look, women have all these sorts of values and it leads to more profit, why aren't we doing it? It's because we are irrational people. In all walks of life, we make irrational decisions. At the heart of human decision making is something called heuristics. Heuristics are basically shortcuts to judgment, and it's an ability, well, people say it's a flaw. It's a facility that we have to use to make judgments in the world on a daily basis. So imagine you're walking down a street and you turn a corner and there's a tiger, um, and your instinct is either, don't know, jump, run, fly, faint, or whatever. Think of that type of reaction in terms of decision making, where you bypass these rationalistic logical processes and use other types of information to get to a decision. A heuristic is a sort of stuff that makes us go, ugh, when our son or daughter is dating this type of person, or what we're talking about. A woman walks into the boardroom and calls herself a technologist. She might be even the most senior technologist, and no one will ask for her opinion just because she's seen a certain way. People have made very quick judgments that they do not realize they have made about this person. First important thing to know, and this is research coming out of the University of Reading at the moment, people see this see heuristic behavior as erroneous, mostly irrational, and that it leads to errors. Research shows that this isn't the case. The best way to explain it is to show that, so think of, actually the best example I can give is something I went through recently. It was an LGBTQ training course that I was in, and the person doing the training said that you should give an example of, I think it was Valentine's Day. You walk up to your colleague and say, "Hey, what are you doing tonight with your boyfriend?" And the person says, "Actually, I've got a girlfriend," and that was meant to be an example of something that's offensive. And next time you should be a little bit more considerate and reflect a little bit about the questions you're asking people, etc. Now, we make hundreds, possibly thousands of these unconscious decisions a day. Now, the reason why that person thought that their colleague was heterosexual is because 95% of the population are heterosexual. It's a very, very, very easy assumption to make. Now, they did not know they were making that assumption. It just happened. And there is no way we have the cognitive ability to reflect on every single one of our decisions. That's where heuristics comes in. It takes shortcuts. It takes environmental data, and it gives us these routes to what is probably going to be a more right decision. So basically, research is saying that just because it's irrational, it doesn't follow logic, doesn't necessarily mean that it is erroneous. So heuristics are part of our everyday decision making, and we cannot change them. To do so would mean making life a little bit more inefficient. If we take time to reflect on every decision in the day, we just wouldn't get stuff done. So it's a feature. It's a facility we have. It's neither good or bad. It has its good and its bad sides. But in and of itself, it just reaches these conclusions. A second thing to say is that there are no socially innate models of inclusion. Again, this is something endowed to us by nature and evolution. We are trained to be part of groups and to belong to them, and to perceive people from outside the group with suspicion and possibly even a threat. That's why it takes education, for example, to change perception, or as I'm going to say, training. But it's just what we do naturally. Therefore, despite all our educational training, it is far more likely that diversity will be seen as a threat without us even knowing it. And therefore, I'm here to give what I will call a skeptical approach to training. And the aim is to make difference count by changing heuristic beliefs. The stuff in beliefs that's basically coming out of the University of Reading, that's what the research says, that there are far more rational components in these heuristics than we admit. And I was involved in a project in academia a few years ago whereby I saw beliefs about people in their fundamental beliefs, i.e., how they perceived their own religion and other people's religion, change with this skeptical approach. And the aim is to change this, to break the sort of social labor belief link. Fine, I'm not here to tell you how to treat women. There are many boards and many men in places like Kenya that do not value women as they should, but as a place like here, but they will certainly value women more highly as executives than they would as a place like here in the West. And thus, the aim is to make sure that you make the best hires that you can. So here is the journey of an executive search process. That's where the perception barrier is usually manifested. I should say from the outset, you can sort of see in stage one, conducting client analysis, you can see very clearly what people's motivation is to get diverse candidates in their shortlist. Usually, it's because the HR said that they have to do it. I was in one assignment where they already knew the person they were going to hire. They selected this person. They just needed to show HR that they had interviewed more diverse candidates. And so we had to find more people who were never going to get the job to go through stages of interview. And it was pointless, basically. I'll give you two stories that will illuminate what the perception barrier would look like. And they're two direct experiences that I've seen. I was in one assignment of placing a chief information security officer in an industry where, let's just say that they're being hacked by governments. So our client had just gone through this huge security breach that cost them quite a lot of money, and they needed a new CISO. And on the shortlist was a woman who had basically built up the entire security functions for basically one of the top global firms in this industry, and had built out the entire security function for an entire country. So, basically, this candidate would have solved our client's problems in 2 years with her eyes closed. I'd met this candidate, we had lunch. I could see exactly why, when I asked our client why they wouldn't choose her, I thought I could see what they see. She's very gentle. She's not in your face. She doesn't come across as assertive, and she does not fit the stereotypical definitions of leadership. However, she was on a class of her own compared to the other people on our shortlist. But they went for the next best person, who was nowhere near her. And when I tried to push back to our clients, They couldn't quite justify, couldn't give a rational reason why they wouldn't want this. Well, her compensation was a little bit higher, but that's not it. They would have been. She was a gift to them, and they didn't take it. I put this in the perception barrier category. Another example: think of very large asset management firm in the West Coast of America. They come to us with a challenging assignment. They need to find someone with a certain composition of experiences that's very, very hard to find. And I think I find someone who is quite close, a very young woman in her 40s. She had done some pretty impressive stuff. I interview her for an hour. I give my colleague the notes, and the colleague says, "Great find. I need to talk to her first before you present her to the client." And after my colleague had interviewed this candidate, my colleague told me, "Well, good find, but there's no way we can present her to our client." I said, "Why never not?" I just said, "Well, look at her. She's so mousy. We're not quite sure. You've seen our client. She shoots from the hip. She's aggressive. She's assertive. Our client would have her for dinner. Should eat her alive. I don't think this is the sort of person they're looking for." And I thought, this is a mistake. This person is very good. By the way, this is something very interesting. That company was actually known for being quite ruthless with their employees. We know this because almost every candidate we spoke to said as much. Perception barrier, and it hurts the organization. How much benefit would, if they have this sort of problem in the organization, maybe they need an executive like this who's not as scary, quite frankly, as other people on the board, and who, quite frankly, is better than other people on the list. So it's pretty clear that leaders do not make the best hiring decisions, and perception barrier prevents hiring the best team. It's not something that will make any statistic, right? All these companies have gone through all the training, behavioral training, structural stuff, or whatever, but we see what most people don't see behind closed doors. What our clients tell us, what different executives tell each other. We learn a lot about these dysfunctional teams called executive boards. And the aim is to change perception of decision makers in the hiring process so that it serves them better, and to change and hopefully in future change the dynamic of the executive board. The method is this skeptical training using the research that I've done that has come out on heuristics. And it is a package that starts with 1 to 2 days in training the board as a board, and then weeks following training individuals in the board. So to tell you a little bit about what I did in academia a few years ago. Problem number one, there were terrorist attacks, and I think in Manchester and in Paris. And, very white British Christian Prime Minister in David Cameron was, telling all of us what Islam is, and was telling Muslims about their religion and it's a peaceful religion, etc. Now, all that was right. The problem was, he was not the person to tell Muslims what to think about their own faith. The Muslim community had to do this. They had to find answers within themselves. And all the educational programs that were directed toward faith schools and religious, already you could see the barriers coming up. It's something that communities needed to work out for themselves. So we set out a training program where we got people. It was used by the Ministry of Education's National Citizenship Service. We had about 800 participants over 2 years. And we didn't target anyone. We said, right, just fill the classroom full of the normal college students that you have. And we're not going to target anyone. We're going to ask everyone the same question. So no group will feel that this package is for them. And we went through the skeptical training. So very basic questions, why do you believe in what you did? Is it because you read this, or you watched that, listened to this person? Is it because you were born? How much of this could you change? How much of this did your opponent change? Can you think of reasons why your own belief system might have flaws? Can you think of why your opponent's belief systems might be true? And they had to go through all this. And at the end of it, the aim of this was to make them far more resilient to certainly propaganda and information that came their way. They basically ask questions back at information, whether it was given to them by a teacher, by a preacher, or something online. And at the end of the program, we asked them to give feedback, and they asked whether their perceptions had changed about other people's religions, and they scored that as 8.1 out of 10 on average. Okay. So basically, I mean, perception is something that isn't accurately measured. So we just have to trust that this feedback was accurate. But they did say that they had changed. And the reason why I know that this is true is because many of the participants and people who did the course and who were trained in delivering the course still write back to me today saying, oh my gosh, you know, we need to do this in other areas. This was so useful. Very, very touching comments. So that was problem number one. Problem number two was growing sexual assaults, number of sexual assaults at university. And I was in pastoral care, so I was there in the hearings and understanding what had happened. And it was tragic to see, you know, basically, it was mostly men, 18 to 19-year-old men. And almost all the time when they were asked why they did what they did, they would say something like, oh, I didn't know she wouldn't like it. I thought this is what usually happens if you're pretty new to this thing called sex. But when the university came in with their policy this induction policy to train in consent, you know, sort of train people to understand that no means no, and, you know, maybe communication is a little bit subtle, etc. I said, this doesn't cohere with what I've heard these people say. You know, they're not stupid. They know what no is, right? It's something deeper, their perception of the other person and their desires. So we applied the skeptical approach with different questions. We just changed the subject matter, and we got the person to write down, you know, their sexual preferences, the ideal, what a good sexual experience looks like, etc. And then we asked them to write down, you know, if they did have a partner and the partner asked them to answer the same questions, would they get these questions right? I.e., if your partner asked you to write down what they want in a sexual experience, would they get it right? And, you know, they began to say that there's more to this thing called sex than just what I think is going to happen. I need to answer the other person's definition of what it is. And it might mean not doing it then. It might mean doing it with this sort of frequency. It might mean dealing with this trauma or not doing it at all, etc. And basically, at the end of the training, you know, the aim was to show that this is not just something you enter into. It can be quite complicated. It's actually matching two people's definitions of what a sexually ideal experience is. So 8.1 out of 10 perceptions change. Okay, I regard this as highly successful. I believe if it is half as successful in this context of diverse hires at executive boards, it would change the industry. It would change commerce. And that's why I formulated this package. Without divulging too much, we're not going to go into it as a diversity training. You guys have done enough of it. It is basically to go to the root of the matter. What is your definition of success, personal, corporate, etc.? How do different people contribute to this definition of success for you? The people above you, the people around you, the people below you, what does it look like? And this is where we start to see trouble coming when people can't answer these questions directly. Where do the threats come from? Are they perceived? Are they real? And usually all the other answers come in. You know, does diversity have a role to play in this? You know, do you think this person isn't performing? Okay, fine, it's true, they're not performing. You're right. But guess what? Neither is anyone else around her, or, you know, other people. Why have you selected this person to say as, you know, to sort of pick out? Or that other person who is so good to have around, you have so much in common, they always say the right thing, they always talk the talk and make you feel like a supporter and they're doing work. Maybe that person is actually far more a threat to you and your position than that person who you have perceived as different. And then we basically get into why these perceptions, basically, are they justified? That's what I call the skeptical approach. Ask people to justify themselves and their feelings, so that the next time they see a diverse candidate, a diverse colleague, a diverse boss, they've asked themselves the right questions. And this, from what we've seen, has been able to change perceptions. All I can say for now is that in another area, in another field, it has worked. It has worked inadvertently with clients that I've dealt with. Whenever I mean, executive search is, it's basically a consultancy, isn't it? So, I always like to ask the intriguing questions and push back at clients to an extent. I want to work with them again. But the whole point of this presentation is to show that real change in perception bias is therefore both possible and non-threatening. I think that, do I switch this off and then move on to questions and answers? Yeah.